All right, everyone. Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. My name is Jason Levine, and thank you so much for joining me today on the audio video masterclass here on behance.net/live, behance.net/Adobe Live, YouTube, and Twitter Periscope. Always great to see you all. Hope you've had a good week. Personally, I'm glad it's over for myself. But we're going to cover a topic today which keeps coming up, and it's something that I've touched upon in several masterclasses, but this is a full 50 plus minutes dedicated to the concept of maximizing loudness. Loudness and punch for the audio in your video, or just your audio in general. And it's something which, if you're not doing something at the final stage of your mix to really glue everything together and just make it significantly louder and a bit more present, then you're losing out. You're missing out on potential audience and engagement, because that's, well, having something that's just maximized and extremely loud is just kind of the way that stuff is delivered today. And if you're not doing it, you're just not going to get the same level of engagement, because you're not going to hold people's attention as long. So I'm going to cover a bunch of different fundamentals along the way. This is going to get pretty technical, pretty nerdy. We're going to focus on a lot of panels that have a lot of data and numbers in them, but hopefully all in an effort to really illustrate and help you understand this concept of how you make things louder. And again, we're going to kind of cover the differences between peak loudness versus average loudness versus the way that you perceive loudness. I'll talk a little bit about normalization, and again, kind of identifying and isolating peaks to see how there's ways that you can tweak things in advance of adding effects like compression or limiting, or one of the ones that I listed in the description, brickwall limiting, which is really that final step, that final stage in the mastering chain that really allows you to deliver something that just punches your audience right in the face, figuratively speaking. So as always, if you are wanting to follow the chat, that is happening over at behance.net/Adobe Live. So as always, great to see you all. A couple of quick hellos before we get started here. Wade Acuff, Missy Kebs, Samuel S., hello. We've got Chris Hahn and Desiree and Digit Media. Nice to see you. Jörg McAllis from Cologne, what's up? Chris Del Rossi, how are you doing? Aristocrat Nana Barima, Quadwo, nice to see you. Leonardo Favoretto, what's up? How are you? Punch and loud, good. All right, and then we've got Deborah Oliveira and Anissa. What is up, Anissa? Great to see you. Monica Kana, Anthony Villa, what's up, man? Jennifer Thompson, Cornell, RB, and Margaret, great to see you all. And Votek, nice to see you as well. Okay, so let's go ahead and switch over. We're going to start here. Kind of just, I want to showcase to you a little something that I've already got in Premiere. This is a piece that we've worked on over the last couple of months. And this scene has already been, we already mixed this. In fact, we did a whole session on mixing dialogue for picture. And this is kind of the mixed version that we ended up with after that masterclass. You can even see that I named it here, mixed, up in the title bar. Now, one of the significant things about this is that when I finalized this mix, I placed a multiband compressor on the master channel. And in doing so, what that allows us to do is to take all of the channels of audio, all of the tracks of audio, sum them together into, in this case, this stereo bus, stereo mix, and then just apply some kind of a global effect to them. In this case, some compression, and you'll see a brick wall limiter there, but I'll talk about that in a second, which is just going to kind of even out some of the dynamics, effectively minimizing the audible dynamic range. And you might think, well, why would you want to do that? Well, again, the idea here is that if you're trying to grab people's attention and keep people's attention, and of course this is slightly different whether you're talking about film, video versus, you know, a trailer or a commercial versus music for Spotify, but conceptually it's all the same. You want to add a little something just because, again, depending upon the scene, depending upon, you know, in this case it's just dialogue, it's kind of an emotional, dramatic scene. There's no sound design, there's no explosions, there's no effects. The audio is pretty consistent to begin with, but the dialogue itself has a couple of random peaks which ultimately affect the overall loudness, the overall consistent loud perception that someone would have when watching this. So by applying a little bit of compression across all bands, it's going to even a little bit of that out. And what you see here is that, and I talked about this on the last stream, I actually wound up using one of the presets here called broadcast, mildly tweaked potentially here. I don't remember if I did or not. A couple of settings, maybe the thresholds for some of the different bands. And I have actually implemented the brickwall limiter. Now, just a real quick, real quick explanation of that. Easy for me to say. The brickwall limiter is, again, your final step in adding punch and loudness. And the concept behind this and how this differs between a regular limiter as part of a compressor limiter is that this allows you to set, which we refer here as a margin, also known as your digital ceiling. And that is an absolute value, meaning that you can push audio to that limit and it will never exceed that limit. Now, in this case, I would never set a margin of 0. You never want in a digital domain to push your audio right up to 0 because 0 is the loudest, most saturated you can get. Little dangerous there because ultimately, while this is going to be exported as an uncompressed ProRes 422HQ with rather PCM uncompressed audio, first of all, you don't need to go all the way up to 0. Your brain is not going to interpret anything. If you did it minus 1.5 or 0, your brain interprets that almost exactly the same. So you're not going to hear a difference. Also, because ultimately this is going to get compressed down to something like H.264 or H.265. Some of you may have seen earlier, was it this week, where they now have announced the H.266 standard? So much going on. It'll take a few years before that gets implemented, no doubt. But whereas here I have the margin set at 0 because I'm not really giving this any additional boost. There's always an element in a brickwall limiter of adding gain, adding a little bit of boost. And in this case, it's the threshold setting, okay? So as the audio exceeds that minus 4.4 decibel threshold, it's giving it a little bit more push, a little bit more punch, and just a little bit more universal loudness across everything. But I'm not intentionally squeezing it, which is why I don't have a margin set below 0 here. We're going to get more into this in just a few minutes. So just to give you an idea of how minimal this initial multiband compression is, I'm going to turn this off. Let's go ahead and wind this back and just play a little bit of this for you and let you kind of hear what it sounds like. I'm just trying to find a good spot for this. All right, take a quick listen here.
But Dwayne, I don't even have any of the money. Amy she split and took it all.
Well, I talked to Amy. She came to see me. You see, she's what they call professional, and you're what they call can't win for losing.
Okay, so that'll give you kind of a pretty decent idea of what this sounds like. Now let's go ahead and turn on the multiband compressor. Now first, I'm going to start with the brickwall limiter off, just so you can kind of hear that, again, I am adding a little bit of additional gain overall, but it's fairly minimal, okay? The first step, though, is just going through these various compressors just to control dynamics, primarily dialogue, across the multiple bands. So I'll kind of turn this on and off. I'll do on, off, so you can kind of hear that. And then I'll kick in the brickwall limiter. All right, here we go. Take a listen.
But Dwayne, I don't even have any of the money. Amy she split and took it all.
Off.
Well, I talked to Amy. She came to see me. You see, she's what they call professional, and you're what they call can't win for losing.
Okay, so you can hear when it's on, it definitely sounds like things are getting a little louder, and you can even see there's very little gain applied. We've got about a decibel of gain on our low band and about 3 dB on the high bands. You're not so much hearing that as you're just hearing that everything kind of seems just a little bit closer together, a little bit warmer. You can hear the voices sound a little bit warmer. Now let's go ahead and turn on the brickwall limiter here so you can see how much additional gain is being added while still maintaining a decent amount of dynamic range.
She tell you she took it all? She took the whole damn score?
What she did is she paid me what she owed me for her half. And now you're gonna pay me what you...
But I didn't get any of the money. Why do I have to pay you if I don't get any of it?
Okay. So here, again, super subtle. Now, if I were to increase this threshold, and by increase, again, this is a negative logarithmic scale. So in this case, if I go -5, -6, -7, -8, you're going to see how this is going to start to get louder and louder and louder. I don't want to do that here because I may need to do some additional equalization, some additional things to this in advance to really maximize the loudness here. But just to showcase this to you, watch what happens when I do that.
Oh, you got it, Liv. You got it. You just lost it. You just lost it. And that ain't my fault. Besides, I gave you the tools. I gave you the phones, I gave you the scripts. I told you what to do, and I told you how to do it.
Okay, so you can see as we lower that threshold, it really starts to push everything up front. But in this particular case, again, it just, one, it's too loud. Two, it didn't sound very good because it needs a little bit of overall tweaking first. And that's what I'm going to showcase to you over on the Audition side. But using this multiband compressor on your master fader with the broadcast preset and a very minimal amount of brickwall limiter here can just do a nice little kind of lift, bring everything together before you go into a more a specific mastering process, or again, trying to add a little bit of limiting after all of this has been mixed down together. All right. So I've already done that. Let's go over to Audition here. Gonna just check our comments and see if anybody's saying anything. What's up? Mohil Islam from Bangladesh and Martha from Michigan. Tari from Zimbabwe and Amos. Cornell, I hate that ads are always louder than TV shows. It grabs attention but annoys at the same time. So very true. And, you know, unfortunately, that's just the way it is. And every time I hear that there's more standards for loudness, I barf on myself because it's nonsense. Yes, in broadcast TV, technically there is, but we still have this problem, right? You still notice that ads are 10 times louder than like a sporting event or something else. And then, of course, anything that's web-based or streaming-based, like Netflix or Hulu or anything like that, I mean, it's all over the map because they don't have the limitations that you have in broadcast TV. So I'm less concerned about broadcast TV these days and just more about grabbing attention, right? If everything were consistently loud, that would be great. The problem is the stuff is still all over the place. And the same goes for music on Spotify and Apple Music and everywhere. They have standards where if you enable their, unify listening levels, they will try and output at a particular loudness level. But the files that go there by themselves, if you don't implement that, automatically equalize volume levels, they can be all over the place depending upon when that record was released or whether it was remastered or not, or again, how it was mixed. There's so many different factors that come into play when you're talking about that. Okay, so in this case here, let's take a look now. This is the actual export that I just did. And if you're looking at this waveform, it probably looks, pretty standard to you. Again, because I had that margin set at 0, I wasn't squashing anything down. So you can see that there's a whole bunch of peaks in here that remain kind of untouched. We did add a little bit of boost overall, just to kind of glue things together a little bit more. You can also see that aside from the music here, the dialogue is largely focused in the center. So this is kind of a mono dialogue, stereo music, sound design kind of scene. But the waveform looks a little wimpy. And if we were to deliver this right now, I can just tell you, even by looking at it, it's just too quiet. It's not going to fulfill that grab you and engage you kind of process as it is right now. But that's fine. That's how all initial mixes should look. Now, just to put it into perspective here, if we take, now this is a dialogue scene with some underscore. Here is, I've shown this before, this is one of my tunes called Fear the Q-Tip. So this is the final mix with a little bit of compression, just stereo compression applied at the end, just to kind of, again, even things out a little, all right? And you can see that this waveform looks pretty healthy, right? And you might think, oh, well, that sounds great. It looks great. It's peaking around -3 or so. This is probably a finished track, right? You could deliver this to Spotify and it would sound great. Well, you could, but it would be very quiet because ultimately, with music in particular, here's what the music, the final mastered audio file looks like. Now you might think to yourself, that just looks like distortion. Is that actually real? Yes. Now, again, your movie soundtrack, your movie mixes, dialogue, film mixes, episodic mixes, chances are probably not going to look like this. You're not trying to squeeze them to death. That's not how we consume that kind of content. Music's a little bit different. But there's a significant difference in loudness here. And when we're talking about loudness, it's really important to understand the difference in peak levels. So to illustrate, I'm actually going to use these audio files here, all right? So we're going to talk a little bit about peak, and then we're going to get into a bit of normalization. This is something that people ask all the time, and I want to explain kind of what normalize is to you. So effectively, normalization, what it does is it looks at all of the peaks in your file, and it analyzes and finds the loudest peak. All right. So when you say, I want to normalize everything to -6 dB, also known as -6 dBFS, what that does is it looks at that loudest peak. And let's say the loudest peak was -10. That means that you have approximately 4 decibels of headroom to raise, okay? So it'll go from -10 to -6. And everything globally goes up approximately 4 dB. You're not compressing, you're not adjusting dynamics, you're not controlling attack transients. You're just globally raising everything by a specified amount. If you said normalize to -2, again, if your peak was -10, that means you have approximately 8 decibels that you could raise everything. So everything gets 8 dB louder. And that in and of itself potentially could be enough to give you enough loudness to deliver your track. The problem is, though, is that sometimes you might only have one peak that's at -10 and everything else is at -20. So that 8 decibels, while that's great, now everything is -12, it's not loud enough. And everything's going to sound fairly quiet. And you just have this one stupid peak, which is kind of throwing everything off. So case in point, just to kind of show you, and then we'll get into loudness here. Here is the original mix. I can just play you a couple seconds of this. Fear the Q-tip. Okay. Artemis, you're interested in mastering for audiobooks. Yes, this concept, everything I'm talking about here applies to audiobooks as well. All right. So let's go ahead and normalize this to -6, okay? Which again means, and we're going to normalize all channels equally, which means it's going to analyze the loudest peak, and then from that loudest peak, it'll boost or cut it down to -6 dBFS, all right? Go ahead and apply it. Okay, so here's what this file looks like at -6, all right? Now, similarly, here is the mastered file, okay? Now, before we go there, let's go ahead and go up to the window menu here and go into Amplitude Statistics, all right? So this is one of those panels in Audition. I show this all the time. One of the best things that we have going here, something kind of unique to this software as an editor, we're going to go ahead and click Scan, and it's going to tell you everything you need to know about this audio file. So what you can see here is it's going to show you, again, the peak amplitude. So we just normalized to -6, right? So you can see that in this case, the loudest peak was actually on the left channel, all right? The right channel was about, 0.11 dB below at some other moment, at that same moment, indicating here, of course, that this is not mono, this is in stereo, all right? No clipped samples. You can see that we're in 32-bit depth here. This is telling you the average perceived loudness of around -21. So again, that may have sounded fairly loud just now in the stream. It's not, all right? You can see things like maximum loudness here. It's pretty quiet, all right? And then you have down below what we refer to as the ITU loudness, measured in LUFS, also known as loudness units relative to full scale. So today, 2020, even for the last several years now already, when we're talking about delivering audio content, whether it's tied to video or an audiobook or anywhere, we're not really so concerned about peaks, and you're going to see why in just a second. We're actually concerned about this value here, this LUFS value, loudness units, because this is the overall perception of the delivery of your content. Now, theoretically, this content as is would be broadcast ready for like commercial broadcast because it falls within the -23, -24 LUFS standard, which is utilized here in the US and Canada and EBU. So if this were going to broadcast TV, theoretically, this track is perfectly legit as is, all right? And it's peaking at -6. So if we take a listen to this. Fear the Q-tip. Okay? You can hear what that sounds like. Now keep in mind, we just normalized to -6. So let's take the same track here, and let's now normalize this to -6. Now, if you're unfamiliar with, again, this concept of loudness and how it differs from peak, you might think, okay, well, if I put this to -6, they're still peaking at the same level. Won't they sound the same? What's the answer to that? No. All right, so and you're going to see why. Let's go up here and go to normalize. Oh, before I do that, let's go ahead and scan this so you can see all the values on this file. Okay, so before we do anything, all right, again, this is a mastered audio file for Spotify. Peak amplitude is 0.3 of a dB below 0. That's pretty standard for singles and things these days. I just told you, you don't need to go to 0. When you're mastering, most of your masters are done to around -0.3. Some are done to -0.2. I do see some that are actually mastered up to 0. 0.3 of a dB below 0, though, it's okay. No clip samples. Now, again, start looking at these maximums, right? Remember before we saw -21? -3. Now, this is measured in the previous scale, dBFS, all right? If we go down, God, perceived loudness, -2.67. What? Super loud. But if we go down here, so we can see that LUFS value, all right, -4.6. So again, this is ridiculously loud. But this is pretty standard today for audio only, something that you'd listen to, again, on Apple Music, Spotify, etc. All right? Pretty standard. It's loud, but not beyond the realm of loudness for most tracks released literally today. All right? Even 2 years ago, this figure was pretty high. 2 years ago, you saw a lot more -8, -7. Now the standards are like -6 to -3. It's crazy how much loudness we're pushing out of tracks these days. So if I go ahead and normalize this to -6 like I did the other, again, you might think, okay, well, so now because they're both peaking at the same level, shouldn't they appear to be the same? Well, first of all, let's rescan the selection here. All right. So while the peaks are hitting that -6 identically, right, the loudness is almost 14 decibels more than the previous track, because this file's already been completely mastered and maximized, right? So now when I listen to this, it's gonna be loud, so, but again, it's peaking at -6, so it's not gonna blow your speakers out, but take a quick listen. Fear the Q-tip. Whoa, super, super loud versus this. Fear the Q-tip. Okay. Quite a difference there. Now you may have just thought to yourself, wow, the first one though, that sounds too loud. Well, yes, when you're A-Bing these two, you weren't ready for it. You wouldn't listen to it necessarily that loud. You turn it down. It's already mastered extremely loud, right? So what this is illustrating to you is that the peak value is irrelevant, right? It's fine, yes, you want to make sure, again, for broadcasters that you have a certain peak level that's maintained. And most of that has to do with when you're going to compressed file formats, there's always peaks that escape. They're recompressing and relimiting everything anyway, but they want to make sure that things fall within a certain range. But more importantly, it's about that program loudness, the overall way that we perceive everything playing back simultaneously to create a continuous soundscape of audio. That's what loudness is, right? So if we go back to our video soundtrack here, all right, now you can see that we've got a lot of work to do. We're going to go ahead and scan this. Let me go back to the chats here. Wade, did I hear Fear the Q-tip in that clip? Yes, you did. Fear the Q-tip, available now on Spotify and everywhere else. By the way, you want to look for Fear the Q-tip remix. There's a version that I released. That's the version, it's got an April release date. There's a version that I released last December. Doesn't have remix in the title. Don't listen to that one. It's one, significantly quieter. It was a mastering error. User error on my part. The wrong thing got delivered. It was a drag. Anyway, I wound up re-releasing a remix version, completely remixed and remastered. Look for that one. Michael Benedict, does this type of mastering risk flattening the overall sound, depleting the original three-dimensionality of the original master, or is this mastering specific to mass media delivery? So yes, Michael, there's always a trade-off. I mean, the more that you're maximizing loudness, you are flattening. It just isn't going to be. Now that's not to say that you still won't hear a kick drum punch, and that has to do with how the mixes are structured. Why does most hip hop today, it's so loud, and the TR, insert 808, 909, CR78, whatever you want, kick drum is always just so, because that's the loudest thing in the whole track anyway. All the music and everything else is secondary, and the vocal, the dialogue, is pretty much the only other thing that's up front. two different frequency ranges, so it's really easy to maintain extreme loudness and keep what appears to be a level of dynamics so that you hear those attacks and hear those kicks. Having said that, if you actually listen to the track and analyze it like this, you'll see that everything, there really is no dynamic. There's no dynamics. You can still hear when there's other things going on. That just has to do with, again, the frequency ranges that these instruments are occupying. But as far as like quiet, loud, quiet, mid-range, quiet, that doesn't exist. It doesn't exist in modern mixing. Now, talking about mastering for mass media delivery, yeah, same thing. I mean, look at any trailer. If you ever watch trailers on Apple TV or YouTube or wherever, trailers are mixed intentionally even hotter than movies, right? Because they're attention getters. They're mixed more like music, like records. Reason for that is trying to get people's attention. If your dynamics are too varied and the dialogue drops down and gets quiet, well, now people have to lean in and listen and try and figure out what your trailer is all about. They're just going to click away. That's the attention span of today's world. So yes, there is a trade-off in doing that. I'm not saying I prefer one, I prefer some dynamic range myself, but that's just not the way things are generally consumed. You don't have to push it to the extreme, okay? But keep in mind that people notice those differences and they'll go, oh, I was just watching this film or this movie or this YouTuber and his stuff was super loud and their stuff is kind of quiet. I have to turn it up, And a lot of that has to do with how you prepare these things. So as we take a look at this file here, first you're going to notice again, peak amplitude, -3. Now from what I just taught you, if you were paying attention, you might think, oh, well, the others were -6. This is -3. This is louder. Of course, incorrect, because peak has nothing to do with loudness. The peak is literally, it could be one sample of your audio that has a loudness, a specific decibel value, but the overall content is quieter than both of those that we heard before, both the pre-mastered mix and the final one. This one's at -26. The pre-mastered mix was -23.4, and the mastered mix was -2 something, right? That or -4. That value still freaks me out because it's just too much. But that's how it is. So how do we make this louder? How do we add punch? How do we add a bit more sonic definition to this? Okay, here's how we're going to do it. So first of all, I want to find out where these peak values are. All right, so the very loudest peak is -3.43. So if I click on this little marker value here, you may have seen it takes the cursor, it shuttles the cursor specifically to that value, which is that peak right there, okay? I can also click on this one here, the -3.6. You can probably see or guess where that one's going to highlight. Okay, it's actually an adjacent peak right there. So in this case, what I probably would want to do is adjust just this specific little peak right here so that I can, again, renormalize and find out and just kind of even things out. Now, as I look at this, I've got about 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe 4. This one, actually, no. So about 3 peaks that I just want to manually control. And all I'm going to do is adjust the amplitude on those. Now, I'm guessing those are probably something like a hard consonant, like, tell me what you said, or bae, or whatever. Some kind of transient attack, which just got a little bit loud. Let's see what it is. Let's take a listen.
Yeah, that ain't my fault. Besides, I gave you
You can hear when he said, I gave you, something in his there was a lot of breath right there. Again, I'm guessing he was probably, boom mic'd. And when we did the audio restoration on this, there was a lot of room tone and room resonance, so that the resonance of his saying, even though it's not a hard consonant, it just momentarily created this very loud peak. We don't need it like that. In fact, if I look at all the other audio, it should probably be around -9. So we're losing almost 6 decibels of potential amplitude for this one silly little sound, all right? So what do we do? All right, let's go ahead and zoom in. And what you can see, there's There's 2 peaks involved here, all right? So let's highlight this first one. Okay, we don't have to be terribly accurate going from kind of point to point, but this is approximately what the selection should look like. And I'm simply going to use this on-clip volume tool. And let's adjust this down to approximately -9, which means we're dropping it about 6 dB. Now you're probably going to see this jump up a little bit. You can see it reconfigured itself ever so slightly. That's standard, that's normal, of course, because as you're making that amplitude adjustment, it has to adjust the samples before and after. So that's why you saw it move just ever so slightly. And then we're going to come over to this one here and do the same thing. And let's go down to -6, which for this one is approximately about a 3 decibel change. All right, take a look at that. Oh, and maybe even this one right here. Okay, down to -6. By the way, as you zoom in more and more, these little blocks that you're seeing here, these are individual samples. Now, it's very rare in these days that you need to edit at the sample level, but you absolutely can. So now, if you take a look there, you can see that the peak registers at -6, okay? And if we take a look at this first peak here, this one appears to be just under -6. So if I go ahead and rescan this audio now, all right? Now you can see our peak amplitude is just that, around -6.14, -6.05 on the right side there, all right? 32-bit depth. Okay, again, you can still see this hasn't affected our loudness, but now everything is a little bit more consistent. Now, as we go further into this, I'm thinking we can probably even save or bring back an additional 3 decibels or more, maybe by using this peak and this one here, all right? Maybe even that one. I'm going to leave this one where it is, all right? So in this case, as I look at these, again, let's hear what this sound is.
I don't even have. I don't even have.
If you do that in front of your hand, you're going to feel this like little burst of air. And for whatever reason, again, that momentary transient snuck through and caused this sort of out-of-band peak. Now, if you don't feel comfortable redrawing these as I just did, I'm going to show you a little trick that you can do right here. All right. Again, this is the only peak we want to affect. We only want to affect this single line right here. So you can see that I select a little bit before and after. What we're trying to do is achieve around a -9 peak here. I'm going to go up to Effects, Amplitude and Compression, and choose the hard limiter. All right. Now this is also a brick wall limiter or a ceiling limiter. Here, what we're going to do is we're going to set a maximum amplitude. So what that's going to do is it's going to say when a signal exceeds -9. Oh, where did I say I want this to go? I want it to go to -6. When a signal exceeds -6, bring it back down to -6. Nothing will exceed -6 decibels now. The only audio that's exceeding -6 is this one little peak right here. And then what you want to make sure, though, is that you're not adding any input boost. We're not trying to make anything louder. We're just trying to squeeze down this one little attack. We're going to leave the look ahead and release time as they are at their default. Go ahead and click Apply. All right. And right away you can see it's now right at -6. Okay. Restored to where it needed to be. All right. And here, what was I saying before? We can probably even get these to -9. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's do -9 instead. Repeat, hard limiter. Let's go to -9. All right. And we're going to do the same for this one here. -9. Again, it doesn't change any of the audio around it. Okay. I'm going to zoom in so you can really see how it's not going to affect anything but this single peak right here. Let's do the same thing. -9. All right. And let's get one more right here. Now, I'll be honest with you. I personally redraw these because, again, I'm just a little more meticulous about that. But as I mentioned, if you don't do any input boost, it's not increasing the amplitude of anything else. All right. So it's pretty non-destructive. And you can also make a smaller selection. So like right here, again, repeat last command, hard limiter, apply, boom, there we go. All right. Everything looks pretty good. These, I got a couple little peaks right here. You can see Those are going to maybe around -7. That's fine. Let's go ahead and scan now. All right. And now what we've done, remember we started around -3. We've effectively brought back 4.5 decibels of amplitude just by fixing 4 little peaks that were just basically screwing everything up. So what that means now, that if we wanted to globally normalize everything to give everything just a little overall volume, I can just do that with the on-clip volume tool here, right? Now we can make this waveform even healthier, okay? Now I'm going to leave it, and in fact I'm going to renormalize to -6. I like to typically mix everything to around -6 with dynamic range, and then start adding a limiter from there. You do want a little bit of headroom in advance. If I say normalize this all the way up to 0 and then apply the limiter, theoretically it means that we have to do sort of less limiting to some degree, but it can also have diminishing returns, particularly with dialogue. So give yourself some headroom in your digital domain before you start adding limiting effects, all right? Now, as mentioned, loudness maximizing in Punch is really one element of mastering. It's not the only thing you're going to do, and I'm not going to cover all of the mastering things here. We've done that on some other masterclasses. I also have my Audio 101 series where I go into large detail on a mastering audio chain. But again, just to give everything a bit more of that punch and loudness, I'm going to show you how we're going to do that now, all right? Yes, we are pruning the little audio bonsai, Cal. I like that. Very cool. All right. Just checking chats. Okay, good. All right. So let's come over to our effects rack here, and we're going to go into our effects chain. And the first thing we're going to do, let's do this. Actually, I'm going to stick this in slot 2, is we'll come up and we could theoretically here use the multiband compressor. Now, you all know, if you've watched me before, I'm a big fan of third-party plugins. So for actual mastering limiters, brickwall limiters, I have a couple of favorites. I'll just show them. I'm not going to use them. I'll go with our native ones here. But I've shown this before, the Waves L2. This is a really classic. It's called the Ultra Maximizer. The name kind of says it all right there. And it's very simple, right? Threshold, right? So as you drop that threshold, it's going to increase loudness, your output ceiling, and then you have your release time here. You don't need an attack in this case. On this particular one, it's auto attack. And depending upon the settings here, if you've got it in arc mode, that's effectively an auto release as well. Quantization, bits, dither, and shaping. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward. Again, I cover this more and what all those mean in the mastering tutorial. There's also another really popular one that I recommend if you're looking for really good sounding sort of finalizers. There is also something called the TC Finalizer. This is another one, the LL3 Ultra Stereo Maximizer. It's just a modified, slightly different version of the L2. Has a different sound, has all the same parameters, it sounds different. They even have some of the same named presets, but this one sounds different. I use these two a lot. There's a couple other ones in here. This is another one that I like. This has a lot of control. It's called the Infected Mushroom. The Pusher, which is kind of funny. This one gives you slightly different controls, as you can see. You have a bit more control, not only over push, and in this case you can use like a clip style limiting or a more traditional style brick wall limiting. But it also gives you control over stereo image. You have sort of high body, a sort of mid EQ, and then a tuned low frequency boost. So this is kind of a combo equalizer, compressor limiter. You can also see you even have a setting here, a slider for dynamic punch. So this can allow you to do some pretty cool things and really kind of color the sound in different ways, again, for different style deliveries. Maybe I'll play a little bit of a couple of seconds of this for you here. Now in this case, of course, we don't really have anything tuned that we're concerned about. There's also some presets, some basic ones. Some of these are pretty intense. I'm curious. Let's go to this punchy master. I'm just curious what this one sounds like. Now, of course, it's all based on how you set the input value. So let's go ahead and play this back, and just for giggles, I just want to hear what it sounds like going through here. Let's take a listen real quickly.
But Dwayne, I don't even have any of the money. Amy she split and took it all.
Well, I talked to Amy. She came to see me. You see, she's what they call professional, and you're what they call can't win for losing.
She tell you she took it all? She took the whole damn score?
What she did is she paid me what she owed me for her half. And now you're gonna pay me what you...
But I didn't get any of the money. Why do I have to pay you if I don't get any of it?
Oh, you got it, Liv. You got it. You just lost it. You just lost it. And that ain't my fault. Besides, I gave you the tools. I gave you the phones. I gave you the scripts. I told you what to do, and I told you how to do it.
All right. So again, I'm kind of doing these to a slightly extreme degree so you can hear them better over the stream. But you can see something like this where you have a bit of EQ, a bit of punch, a bit of push control. So I was doing a little bit with the stereo imaging, so the audio, which is distorted by nature, was kind of spreading out. This is a slightly unique mastering tool. Again, not my always go-to, but I do like that sound for some types of music mastering. But for us today, let's focus on the native multiband compressor, okay? Now, because we've already used the actual compression bands here, I'm going to disable all of those. So just by default, when you open this, if you come in and you simply click on the B bypass, it is now not going through the compressor circuitry of this effect anymore. The only thing we want to use, and we want to make checked or enable, is this brickwall limiter checkbox right here. All right. Now, it's a good idea to start with your threshold at 0. So again, that's the equivalent of no boost, no additional gain. And then your margin. Now, again, when I'm delivering to YouTube these days, typically everything I'm sending there, I keep the ceiling at -2 dB, which again means that it will push everything right up to -2, but it will never exceed -2. So you'll never have any clipped samples. The other benefit with -2, as opposed to -1.5 or -1.1, especially if you're going to YouTube, is that a 2 decibel bit of headroom is usually the range when you go to a compressed format like H.264, your audio changes. And once you compress that audio, your peaks change. And those peaks can exceed a decibel and a half from where they were before, meaning that you set the margin to -2, your master will be -2. But if you recompress to a compressed file format, now it could be -0.5 for a moment, right? There could be a transient that escapes. In any case, this gives you enough headroom when going to something like YouTube where you're not going to have any weird clicks or pops or distortions. You could drop it even lower too. I think this one only goes down to -5. Yeah, that's the lowest this particular limiter will even go. You could do that too. And again, that doesn't mean you can't make something extremely loud and present. I just proved that to you before, right? When we normalized the audio, the music to both -6, the mastered one was still loud as heck. So it has a lot more to do with all the other elements going on. So that's entirely up to you and what, your provider, if you're designing something for Netflix or Hulu, they have specific standards in terms of where they want loudness and peak. So this makes it easy to dial those values in. Let's keep it at -2. Now, for this kind of program material, again, a dialogue scene, you want a fairly quick attack. You want you want it to just basically be kicking in most of the time. So a 4 millisecond attack is aggressive, but to the point where it's going to be it's going to sound fairly natural. You're not going to hear it kicking in. And then the release time here, this is a significant value. Now, the default I've changed this, so I don't know if the default is 500 milliseconds. That's a half a second release. What that means is once it, begins squashing stuff down, how long it takes to recover. Now, if you give it a lot of additional boost, it's probably never going to fall much below that threshold. So you'll never really hear it release the limiter. If you're doing something like a dialogue scene like this, a half a second release time is probably okay. For most music, if you want things really aggressive and even trailers, I'd probably go to 150 milliseconds. All right? It's just a quicker release time, and it kind of adds some additional tension to the overall loudness of your material. Now, this isn't a trailer. It's a slow-moving scene. So I wonder what the maximum is on here. Oh, the maximum is 500. Okay. So wow, this really has kind of limited parameters. Most of your mastering limiters will at least give you up to a second or 1,000 milliseconds. So that's the maximum here. For this kind of a scene, a half a second release time can work, we can start there. I would probably go with 150 to 250 for something like this. And if this were just music, that would probably be 59 to 79 milliseconds. A much faster release because, again, that Fear the Q-tip, there's a lot of a lot of percussion, a lot of percussive attacks, short transients, and I want them to pump. I want them to really just in your face. So the faster the release, the more pump and the more aggression, theoretically, you're adding to that master, to that final output, all right? So let's go ahead and take a listen here and see what we can do with this. All right, so we're going to wind it back. And all we're going to do now is we're going to start to address the threshold value until it gets to a level that is, you know, we like or is like comfortable to listen to. Again, there's some like other elements in here which I could have cleaned up in the dialogue that we didn't in the previous one. I'm hearing some of those as we get a bit louder. But we'll do it and then we'll reanalyze it and see how we've affected the program loudness, all right? Oh, and let's just go ahead and rescan this right now just to see where we are. So yeah, so you can see that right now it's at -6 is our peak, all right? And then our program loudness units. Whenever I hear units, it always makes me think of Guardians of the Galaxy. 2 million units, rocket! All right. You think there'll be a day when our currency is just, we're just being paid in units? Or is rewatching the new Star Wars series, the last 3. Why am I forgetting the first one? Force Awakens, and everything is, you know, you get 1/4 portion in portions and units. That's probably what's going to happen. Okay, let's go ahead and take a listen.
But Dwayne, I don't even have any of the money. Amy she split and took it all.
Well, I talked to Amy. She came to see me. You see, she's what they call professional, and you're what they call can't win for losing.
She tell you she took it all? She took the whole damn score?
What she did is she paid me what she owed me for her half. And now you're going to pay me what you...
But I didn't get any of the money. Why do I have to pay you if I don't get any of it?
All right. So already it's getting a lot louder. Now, I'm gonna throw a little curveball in here, because another way that you can maximize loudness and punch is via EQ. Now again, this is something that you would do in your final mastering chain anyway. In this particular example, I'm hearing that after we add this compressor, there's a little bit of harshness in the mid-range of the dialogue. Now again, if I were redoing this now, I'd say I would go back and actually readjust that specifically on this actor's voice recording. A little bit of harshness. Now, there's a question that people always ask is, well, do you EQ before brickwall limiting or after? A lot of times you do both. In this case, because it's getting a bit more harsh after the fact, I would probably do a slight amount of EQ after this limiter. But keep in mind, when you do that, now this margin value, it's not absolute anymore because you're applying something else after that margin has been set. So in theory, you could end up with something that is slightly higher or slightly lower than -2 if you add effects after, which then means that you may, if you're concerned about your absolute peak value, right, your absolute ceiling value, you might add another type of limiter, brickwall limiter, at the chain, at the end of the chain. Now, I wouldn't recommend using the same effect. You could use something like the hard limiter that we saw before, the native hard limiter. Or in my case, I would probably go to something like that L2, right, or L3. It's always a good idea to mix up the sounds of the effects that you're applying. It's really common in the studio. It's a couple, with everyone doing recordings and like remixes, sheltered from home. I saw a great remix of a Doobie Brothers track, and I don't remember the mix engineer's name. It was it Listen to the Music? No, it wasn't Listen to the Music. I'm forgetting which track it was, but on his master fader, he started, and initially he added like the standard SSL 2-channel compressor, which is also known as the record maker. Then he added some EQ. Then he added a brickwall limiter. Then he added another EQ in the chain, and then he put in another analog limiter in there. Totally standard, totally normal, and the whole track just comes alive. So I might start by coming in here. Let's just do this around minus 12. All right. And I'm just going to pull up our parametric EQ. All right, let's flatten this out, go into full reset. I'm going to start with our mid-band right here, fairly narrow. And I want to listen here and see if I can kind of find where I'm hearing that harshness, all right?
And now you're going to pay me what you...
But I didn't get any of the money. Why do I have to pay you if I don't get any of it?
Oh, you got it, Liv.
So it's right there, around 2,500 hertz. So I'm going to just pull this down, all right?
You got it. You just... And now you're going to pay me what you...
But I didn't get any of the money. Why do I have to pay you if I don't get any of it?
Oh, you got it. And now you're going to pay me what you...
But I didn't get any of the money. Why do I have to pay you?
All right, let's kick it back in.
But I didn't get any of the money. Why do I have to pay you if I don't get any of it?
All right. So by minimizing that 2,500 hertz at around 3.5 dB, while you might say to yourself, oh, well, now haven't we just quieted it by 3.5 dB? Well, yes, theoretically, yes, we did quiet that specific frequency and some of the adjacent frequencies. But in fact, by minimizing some of that harshness, because now you're actually emphasizing a bit more of the low end there, it's actually feeling almost in some cases a bit more present, a bit louder, because now we're feeling a more warm, full-bodied sound versus this upper range harshness, okay? Now, again, as you play back, you may go, well, we need to add back a little bit more warmth in here.
She tell you she took it all? She took the whole damn score?
You know, and you could do something like add an additional EQ. Again, it could be a different one here, so let's go ahead and do that. Let's choose one of my, again, this is one of my third-party faves, the Manny American. Does this have full reset too? It does. Oh, but it's not fully resetting. Hold on, let's see, there we go. There we go, all right. Add a little bit of warmth back in here. Let's take a listen here.
What she did is she paid me what she owed me for her half. And now you're going to pay me what you...
But I didn't get any of the money. Why do I have to pay you if I don't get any of it?
Oh, you got it, Liv. You got it. You just lost it. You just lost it. And that ain't my fault. Besides, I gave you the tools. I gave you the phones. I gave you the scripts. I told you what to do, and I told you how to do it.
All right. So I just added back in there a little bit of warmth, okay? Now, again, if we wanted to give this even just a little more boost or to ensure that we stay at -2, I could come in here, theoretically, and go into something like the hard limiter, set this to -2, no additional boost, and now...
But I don't have the money.
But I don't care.
Of course, I have to go to a quieter section there. It will now never exceed -2. And we're not boosting anything else, but it's just going to catch any of those additional peaks that may have escaped through because we did a little post-limiting EQ right here. It's going to ensure they stay at -2. So let me just turn it off. Let's see how we did. Let's turn that off. I'm going to go ahead and apply this. All right. Now look at that already. That's a healthy looking waveform. And if we scan the selection, all right, you can see that by doing those EQ changes, it's now the peak is -1 and -0.83, still okay, no clip samples. And now when we look at the average loudness, look at that. Remember it was like -26, -27 initially? We brought that up almost 12 decibels, okay? And now if this were going to TV, this is already too loud for broadcast TV. But for the web, for dialogue, for this kind of a thing, this is pretty legit. Okay, this is pretty standard, and we still have some dynamic range in there. It still feels alive. Now, let's undo that, put the hard limiter back in there, right? Go ahead and apply this, rescan, and the only difference now is that you're going to see that the peak amplitude has been adjusted. So now it is peaking again directly at -2, and we are just at -15.28. So the change, again, 0.05 dB, you're not going to perceive that difference at all. All right. So louder, more present, more in your face, more punchy. This is one of the final steps that you're going to use before you deliver to YouTube. And you should be doing this before you deliver to YouTube, before you go to Instagram, before you go to Twitter, anywhere. Adding just that final step of a bit of loudness. Now again, if you want really the proper concept of a mastering chain, we're going to use compression and EQ and limiting and brickwall limiting and maybe some stereo expansion and some other things. I highly recommend you check out some of the previous master classes that we've done here, or you can go to my Audio 101 series on Jason Levine video on YouTube, and I have a whole 1-hour class specific on mastering, and then additional 1-hour classes on compression, on limiting, and then using all of these things together. So looks like, just checking here if we've got any more additional comments. No, I'm not really seeing much poking through. Stephanie's here. What is up? Working and editing 5 commercials, upcoming productions. Oh, very nice. You're getting a new computer at the end of this month. Microsoft 13.5 Surface laptop. Oh, Steph, that's awesome. Someone was just telling me yesterday, someone I know just got one of those. So hope you enjoy working with that. All right, my friends. So until next time, now back next week, I'll be back on doing the masterclass here. We're going to do a combination video audio scoring session. You may have noticed that I changed around the studio a bit and modified some things. We've got all the cool keyboards in there. The Moog is over there, so we're going to be doing some of that. So until then, have a great rest of your morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are in the world, and we'll see you again next time. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.